Humanity had always been underestimated. To the wider galactic community, we were still young, still clumsy, still caught between idealism and survival. We were described as sentimental dreamers who clung too tightly to emotions, who built monuments to memory instead of empires of dominance, who carried the weight of history as if it were a shield instead of a burden. To many alien cultures, our compassion was a curiosity, a weakness to be studied, mocked, or exploited. We were tolerated, not respected. We were invited into the halls of interstellar diplomacy, but always made to stand at the edges, like children allowed to watch the grown-ups speak. The galaxy was vast, filled with species that had spent millennia carving their names into the stars. They had fought wars older than our recorded history. They had torn each other's worlds apart and rebuilt them again with cold pragmatism. Among them, strength was measured not in mercy but in cruelty. Fear was the currency of survival, and into this ruthless expanse, humanity arrived with open hands, eager to cooperate, eager to prove we could belong. For a time, it seemed we might succeed. We offered technology, trade, even our art and music, which fascinated some civilizations. Yet beneath that fragile exchange, resentment brewed. There were those who saw us as nothing but prey dressed in polite words, and none embodied that view more completely than the Rakari. The Rakari were an old empire, insected predators who had risen from endless wars on their homeworld. Their exoskeletons shone like obsidian armor, their mandibles clicked with amusement at the suffering of others, and their entire culture was built on conquest. They respected only dominance, only the crushing of opposition, only the silence of subjugated worlds. To them, mercy was an alien disease. To them, peace was just weakness pretending to last. And when they first encountered humanity, they dismissed us with laughter. They called us soft-worlders. They sneered at our attempts at negotiation. They labeled our compassion a flaw so profound that extermination would be inevitable. Still, we tried. Humanity always tries. We reached out with treaties, offered coexistence, and built colonies that could stand as bridges between cultures. Haven's Reach was one such colony. It had been founded not as a fortress but as a sanctuary. Built at the edge of settled space, it was a refuge for children orphaned by war, not only human children but alien as well. For every species scarred by conflict, Haven's Reach extended a hand. It was a place where young lives could be rebuilt, where laughter replaced mourning, where education replaced indoctrination. Teachers from Earth volunteered to live there. Alien caretakers joined them. And for years, Haven's Reach had been a symbol of what humanity believed in most, the stubborn idea that innocence was worth protecting. Life there was quiet. Gardens grew in domes under alien suns. The air was filled with different languages spoken by children who no longer remembered their parents' faces. Some drew pictures of ships, others of animals they had never seen except in books. There was sorrow, yes, but there was also hope. Humanity had made a promise to those children that they would never again be abandoned to war. In a galaxy of predators, Haven's Reach was a defiant whisper of peace. But predators do not tolerate defiance. The Rakari saw Haven's Reach not as a sanctuary but as an insult. To them, raising children in safety instead of training them as soldiers was laughable. They studied the colony from afar, sneering at its domes and schools, dismissing it as a soft target. And in their war councils, they decided that nothing would teach humanity its place more effectively than to burn the orphanage to ash. The attack came without warning. One moment the sky above Haven's Reach was clear, and the next it was filled with shadows. The children pointed upward in awe, not yet understanding what those silhouettes meant. The alarms screamed. Teachers ran, gathering as many as they could, shouting orders into comms that already crackled with interference. The Rakari had come in force. Ships descended, their weapons primed, their intent unmistakable. They did not target military outposts. They did not target defenses. They targeted homes. They targeted schools. They targeted the orphanage first. The bombardment was merciless. Domes shattered under fire, air rushing out into the void. Buildings crumbled as plasma seared through walls meant for learning, not war. The playground where children had laughed only hours earlier became a crater. Teachers threw themselves over their students, shielding them with fragile bodies that could not withstand orbital strikes. The Rakari fired again and again, as if each shot was a declaration. Your compassion is worthless, your children are nothing, your hope is ash. Some tried to flee. Shuttles launched, carrying terrified survivors, but many were torn apart before clearing the atmosphere. Transmissions screamed across the void, desperate calls for help that reached too late. In the command center, a final recording was sent out, a broadcast of fire and ruin, of teachers singing to calm crying children as the world collapsed around them. That recording would later be played across every human colony, and every time it played, the same sound echoed, the laughter of Rakari soldiers mocking what they had done. When the smoke cleared, Haven's Reach was gone. The orphanage was nothing but rubble, its survivors counted in handfuls. Humanity watched in silence at first, unable to comprehend the scale of cruelty. We had seen war before. We had suffered losses before. But this was different. This was not a battle fought for resources or territory. This was an execution, deliberate and cold. They had targeted children, our children, alien children, the most innocent lives among us, simply to prove that we were weak. The galaxy reacted in fragments. Some species expressed horror but offered nothing. Others looked away, unwilling to challenge the Rakari. A few even whispered that perhaps this was the natural order, that humanity had dared too much, too soon, and paid the price. But among humans there was no debate, no hesitation. Something broke inside us that day, something that could never be repaired. The Rakari thought they had taught us fear. What they had awakened instead was wrath. The funerals stretched for weeks. Coffins draped in flags were lowered into the earth on worlds far from where the children had died. Their names were etched into stone, monuments built in every colony so that no one could forget. Survivors of Haven's Reach spoke of fire raining from the sky, of holding hands in the darkness, of songs sung through tears. Each story was a wound carved into our collective memory. Leaders tried to offer words of comfort, but comfort was not enough. What people wanted, what every soldier, every parent, every survivor demanded was justice. And so humanity gathered. Veterans re-enlisted. Factories roared to life. Scientists abandoned their projects of peace and turned their hands to war. Civilians volunteered, some offering their labor, others their lives. Across the colonies, a phrase began to spread, whispered first in grief, then shouted in fury. Total war. We had always been reluctant warriors. We had always tried to temper violence with reason, to balance vengeance with restraint. But the Rakari had taken that choice from us. They had bombed an orphanage. They had killed children. There was no greater crime. There was no forgiveness possible. And so, for the first time in our history among the stars, humanity resolved not to defend, not to negotiate, not to endure. We resolved to unleash everything we had, without mercy, without hesitation, until the Rakari learned what it meant to awaken a species whose compassion, once betrayed, transforms into something far more terrible. The leaders stood before the gathered fleets, their voices steady, their faces carved in stone. They did not speak of conquest. They did not speak of glory. They spoke of duty, of vengeance, of a promise made to the dead. The orphans of Haven's Reach could not be saved, but their memory could be avenged. Their laughter could echo in the fire we would bring. Their innocence could be honored in the fury of our resolve. The declaration was broadcast across the stars, carried on every frequency, repeated in every tongue. We are humanity. We asked for peace and you gave us war. We offered our hand and you struck at our children. We will not forgive. We will not forget. And now, we will show you what it means when humans decide that mercy is no longer an option. The decision for war was not made in a single room, nor signed on a single document. It was not the work of politicians alone, nor generals, nor scientists. It was born in every home, in every family, in every grieving heart. Across Earth and her colonies, the image of the orphanage's ruins burned into every mind, and from that fire came resolve. There was no more debate, no more hesitation, no more illusions that peace could be held with predators who understood only blood. The people did not wait for their leaders to call them. They stepped forward willingly, driven by a single truth. If humanity did not answer this cruelty, then nothing we built would ever be safe. Factories that once produced farming equipment were stripped overnight and retooled into arms manufactories. Assembly lines roared, churning out weapons and armor, ships and ammunition. Miners worked double shifts, hauling ore from the deepest veins, while entire civilian freighters were converted into makeshift carriers. Engineers dug through blueprints of old machines, modifying, reshaping, weaponizing. Even the smallest colony outpost, far from any front line, contributed something: metal, food, personnel, energy, because everyone understood that this war belonged to all of us. There was no conscription. None was needed. Volunteers surged by the millions, so many that training centers overflowed. Veterans long retired returned, teaching the younger generations how to fight, how to survive, how to endure. Parents who had buried their children were the first to enlist, their faces hollow, their voices quiet but unshakable. They needed no speeches. They needed no encouragement. The war was already inside them. Strategists gathered in war councils, maps spread before them, eyes shadowed by grief and determination. Some argued for caution, for careful strikes, for patience. Others demanded immediate retaliation, a flood of fire to drown the Rakari in their own blood. In the end, the decision was forged by consensus. There would be no hesitation, but there would also be no waste. Humanity would not throw lives into the void. This war would not be fought for revenge alone, but for survival, for deterrence, for the assurance that no enemy would ever again mistake compassion for weakness. The plan that emerged was simple in its brutality: strike their supply chains, bleed their fleets, starve their armies, break their will. The Rakari had taught us cruelty, but we would not mirror their slaughter of innocents. We would not bomb nurseries or burn civilian cities. That was not who we were. Instead, we would destroy everything that gave them power to wage war. Every shipyard, every command hub, every line of logistics. They would fall, one by one, until the empire itself crumbled. And so the campaign began. The first retaliatory strike fell on a listening post orbiting a barren moon at the edge of Rakari space. The outpost was lightly defended, for the Rakari did not expect humans to attack so swiftly, so brazenly. They assumed we would hide, rebuild, lick our wounds, beg for treaties. Instead, we came with fire. Human ships slipped from the void like wolves, weapons hot, engines burning. They struck without hesitation, annihilating defenses before alarms could be raised. The station was torn apart in minutes, its wreckage scattered across the stars. Not a single Rakari soldier survived. The humans left behind no warning, no message, no demands, only silence, broken metal, and the promise of more to come. Word spread quickly. The Rakari laughed at first. A single outpost destroyed by surprise, what of it? They called us desperate, suicidal, a nuisance at best. But when more attacks followed, when convoys were ambushed and garrisons wiped out, when supply ships simply vanished into the void, their laughter began to falter. Humanity was not hiding. Humanity was hunting. Our fleets learned quickly. Where the Rakari relied on brute force, we relied on adaptability. Where they followed doctrine, we improvised. Where they expected hesitation, we struck boldly. Our ships were smaller, less armored, but our crews fought with a ferocity the Rakari had never witnessed. Every pilot, every marine, every engineer carried the memory of Haven's reach inside them, and it burned hotter than any reactor. They fought not for conquest, not for wealth, not for orders written by distant leaders, but for the children who had been murdered. That kind of motivation could not be measured in statistics or strategy. It made us unpredictable, relentless, terrifying. The Rakari began to lose ground. Outposts fell one after another. Convoys burned in the darkness. Even when they won battles, they bled heavily, their ships scarred, their morale shaken. Reports filtered through their ranks of human soldiers who fought past the point of death, who dragged themselves forward even while bleeding out, who detonated charges with their last breath just to take one more enemy with them. Whispers grew among their ranks that humanity did not fear death, that humanity welcomed it, that every human who fell only fueled the rage of the living. At home, the war effort consumed everything. Families rationed food willingly, donating excess to the fleets. Artists sculpted monuments of steel and fire, reminding everyone why they fought. Children too young to serve worked in factories, weaving uniforms, carrying supplies. Humanity became a single, unified machine of vengeance. No voice spoke against the war. No hand held back. Every individual was bound by the same oath: never again. Psychologists observed a shift in our people. Where once we had been quick to forgive, quick to compromise, now we were unyielding. The softness that other species mocked was still there, but it was turned inward, reserved only for our own. To the outside, we showed only steel. Even survivors of Haven's Reach, the few children pulled from the rubble, carried themselves with the same fire. Their drawings no longer depicted gardens or animals. They drew warships, fire, banners of vengeance. They whispered to soldiers leaving for the front, telling them to fight harder to make the Rakari pay. The innocence the Rakari had tried to destroy had not vanished. It had transformed into something sharper, something unbreakable. For the first time in recorded history, other alien species began to fear us. Not because of the size of our fleets, nor the sophistication of our weapons, but because of our resolve. They saw a young species that had been wounded and, instead of retreating, had risen with claws bared. They saw a people who turned grief into unity, compassion into fury. And quietly, many of them began to reconsider their own dealings with humanity. The Rakari High Command, however, still underestimated us. To them, this was just a flare of rebellion, a burst of rage that would soon fade. They gathered fleets, prepared counterattacks, and promised their soldiers that the humans would break under pressure. They promised victory. They promised our extinction. But in their arrogance, they failed to understand the truth. We had already accepted death. We were not fighting to survive. We were fighting to ensure that our enemies could never again touch what we loved. And that kind of war, once begun, does not end until one side is ash. The campaign escalated. Larger battles erupted at the fringes of Rakari territory. Human fleets struck with precision, crippling infrastructure. Planets that had once felt secure under Rakari protection now trembled as news spread of human strikes drawing closer. Entire sectors were destabilized. Panic began to ripple through the Rakari civilian population, who had been told humans were weak, incapable, soft. Now they heard stories of fleets that came in silence, struck with fury and vanished like ghosts. They heard stories of soldiers who fought like demons, whose eyes carried no mercy. And still, the humans pressed on. Every battle was fought with the memory of Haven's Reach carried like a banner. Every victory was dedicated to the orphans who could not see it. Every loss only fueled the fire further. Humanity had entered the war reluctantly, but now we embraced it fully. The galaxy would never again mistake our kindness for weakness. The galaxy would never again forget what happens when you make humans bleed. The Rakari believed the tide would turn. They had fought empires older and stronger than humanity. They had weathered rebellions, crushed uprisings, broken fleets many times the size of ours. To them, our campaign was an irritation, a wound that stung but could be healed with one decisive strike. They assembled armadas, recalling ships from distant sectors, gathering every resource they could spare. Their leaders promised swift retribution, a show of power that would break our momentum. But in their arrogance, they failed to see how deeply the fire had already spread. Humanity had moved beyond simple retaliation. We had embraced war with a completeness that even the oldest civilizations found terrifying. There was no turning back, no compromise, no bargain left to offer. The Rakari had taken from us what could never be restored, and we would not stop until their empire lay in ruin. The campaign of fire began in earnest. Human fleets struck deeper into enemy space, no longer content with outposts and convoys. Shipyards burned. Orbital defenses were ripped apart. Command stations that had overseen conquests for centuries were reduced to drifting debris. Every strike was executed with ruthless precision. Every target was chosen not for symbolic value, but for the machinery of war it sustained. The Rakari could no longer laugh at our defiance. They could no longer dismiss us as prey. For the first time in living memory, they began to fear. Our tactics were unlike anything they had faced. They expected opponents to meet them head-on, to fight in lines of battle, to rely on strength of numbers. But humanity did not fight like that. We struck from unexpected vectors, vanished before reinforcements arrived, returned where they were weakest. We weaponized unpredictability. We turned every disadvantage into a blade. Where their fleets moved like armies, ours moved like packs of wolves, tearing at their flanks, bleeding them dry before delivering the killing blow. It was not honor they faced. It was not tradition. It was survival turned into art, vengeance sharpened into strategy. At the heart of every strike was memory. Pilots carried tokens from Haven's reach, scorched fragments of toys, photographs of children, names etched onto armor. Soldiers painted their weapons with the symbols of the orphanage, a reminder of what had been lost. And every time they pulled the trigger, they did so with the weight of a promise that no child would ever again die screaming under a sky filled with fire. That promise made us unstoppable. The Rakari response grew desperate. They tightened defenses, pulled back fleets to guard their core worlds. But in doing so, they abandoned outlying systems, leaving colonies exposed. For decades, they had ruled through fear, forcing obedience with the threat of annihilation. But now, those subject peoples saw the cracks forming. They watched the humans carve through Rakari fleets and realized the empire was not invincible. Rebellions ignited like sparks across the galaxy. Slave races rose in defiance. Supply lines fractured further. The Rakari had sought to break us with cruelty, but it was their own cruelty that now undermined them. Still, victory did not come easily. Battles cost us dearly. Our fleets were smaller, our losses heavier. Every human death weighed on us, yet instead of breaking morale, it only steeled our resolve. To the Rakari, death was the end. To us, death was a torch passed to the living. Each fallen soldier became a rallying cry. Each shattered ship became a monument to perseverance. The Rakari could not understand how we endured, how we fought harder with every loss, how we turned grief into fuel. That failure to understand would become their undoing. The decisive moment came at the edge of their home sector, where the Rakari had gathered their largest fleet in centuries. It was a wall of steel and fire, an armada designed to crush anything in its path. By their calculations, it should have been enough to annihilate us. They expected us to falter at the sight, to retreat into defensive lines, to cling to what we still had. Instead, we attacked. Outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, we charged into the storm with a ferocity that defied reason. We fought as if every ship carried the souls of the dead, as if every life lost had been watching from the stars and urging us forward. The battle raged for days. Hulls cracked, fire spread, wreckage drifted by the thousands. Entire wings of human ships were obliterated, yet replacements surged forward, refusing to yield. Rakari commanders watched in disbelief as humans fought past exhaustion, past fear, past the limits of flesh and machine. We rammed their flagships, boarded their carriers, detonated reactors in suicidal charges that shattered fleets. It was not strategy alone that carried us. It was will so unrelenting that the Rakari realized too late what they had unleashed. When the smoke cleared, the Rakari fleet was gone. Their command shattered, their defenses broken, their home sector exposed. Humanity stood bloodied, scarred, but unbroken. The galaxy stared in silence, unable to deny what they had witnessed. A young species, dismissed as fragile, had faced one of the oldest empires and driven it to its knees. Not through superior numbers, not through overwhelming technology, but through unity, through rage, through the refusal to accept annihilation. The aftermath was not triumph but silence. Survivors drifted among the wreckage, searching for comrades who would never answer. Entire crews gone, entire families extinguished. The cost of victory was carved into us as deeply as the scars of Haven's Reach. Yet even as we mourned, we knew the war was not finished. The Rakari still lived, still breathed, still held power. But the myth of their invincibility had been destroyed forever. The galaxy began to whisper. Species that had mocked us now spoke of us with awe and fear. They saw that we did not fight like them, that our wars were not waged for territory or dominance but for people, for memory, for promises carved into stone. They realized that to harm what humanity loved was to awaken something they could never control. And though many would never admit it aloud, they began to adjust their dealings with us, wary, respectful, cautious. Humanity had stepped onto the stage not as prey, but as a predator all its own.